Welcome. I am so excited to be joined by organisational development and change expert Ann-Marie Barlow. Ann-Marie is the founder of Energize Development, consultancy specialising in leadership development, organisational culture, executive coaching and change. With more than 15 years' experience in local government and the public sector, Ann-Marie helps organisations navigate complex, gnarly people challenges with confidence and humanity. A form of head of organisational development, Ann-Marie combines strategic insight with a practical, down-to-earth approach that supports leaders to create healthier cultures and bring out the best in their people. Now, I've known Ann-Marie for a fairly long time, and I can confirm that she is one of the warmest, most insightful people I have ever met, and I'm really looking forward to you benefiting from her warmth, wit, and wisdom today. Well, hello there. Welcome to Manage with Confidence with me, your host, Dr. Hayley Lewis. Each episode, I'll explore common issues that people managers like you often grapple with. For example, giving negative feedback or keeping your team motivated during change, or maybe you're trying to manage people with diverse needs. I'm here with you, giving you support when you need it so that you can manage with confidence. So sit back, grab a cuppa and find out what to expect from today's episode. Welcome, Ann-Marie. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I'm so excited. You just know so much and you're so skilled and experienced around different aspects of change and helping managers navigate and their teams navigate that change. So I just had to get you on. So yeah, share a little bit more about your background and what really inspired you to go deep on helping leaders and managers navigate change.
I came into OD in a non-traditional way. So I don't come from a background of HR. I spent most of my career up until about 5 years ago working in local government. And at the time I was a housing benefits officer. So I'd worked in various kind of customer service type roles and I was processing people's housing and council tax benefits. And the team that I was working in, they'd become part of like a bigger, like area-wide service. And then we had two councils that had merged. And I'd just been through quite a lot of change at work. And to be honest, I felt like the changes weren't to our benefit as employees. And I was probably quite disengaged, if I'm honest. And we'd had a new chief exec come in and things started to feel a bit different. And I thought, oh, maybe I do actually want to be here and maybe I could be happy again. And one day I shared a floor with lots of other people and there was a trade union rep who was on our floor and he stopped me in the kitchen. He said, Ann-Marie, have you seen these jobs that have come out? There's some secondments to go into our transformation team. You should apply for it. And I said, but I don't have any experience in like project management or kind of corporate services. And he said, no, but you're someone that moans to me when things aren't great. And I think you could help fix things. And so I thought, oh, okay, maybe I'll give it a go. So I ended up getting secondment, really enjoyed it. And I realized I'd found this home for my career that I didn't know that existed, which was organisational development. And in particular, the gritty side of people change. And from there, I just kind of found my thing and really, it was hard. It was really hard, but it was something that I just was naturally really drawn to. And then that culminated in me getting a job as a head of organisational development in a brand new unitary council, which was like the dream job for me. And then about 5 years ago, I decided to go freelance and then I started my own business. And that's where I got to where I am today.
Ta-da! Just like that. And a lot of the work that you do now tends to veer towards change and transformation. And not a day goes by when an organisation I'm working with isn't going through some kind of change. Why do you think change management is one of the most challenging aspects of a manager's job today?
I think because it's relentless. Change used to be a thing that would happen every kind of 3 or 4 years. And now just when you think you've got over something, something else is on the horizon. So I think we're not really getting an opportunity to take stock and have a kind of, this is how life's going to be for us. It's always changing. So I think that's really hard generally for everybody. But I think managers in particular, it's particularly hard for them because they're there to manage their team through change, and they're expected to manage their team through change, but they probably haven't had a voice in making a decision about whether the change should happen in the first place. So they get this thing that comes to them and they've got to tidy it up and make it work and make it happen. And day to day, their team might not connect with the change that's happening or want to get on board, but they have to stay stable. So I think they're in a really, we've talked before about the messy middle. They really are in the messy middle when it comes to change.
Yeah, and the squeezed middle as well. There's a couple of things recently that have come up, and I'd be really interested to know your thoughts on this. So I recently read Rachel Miller's book, Successful Change Communication. Now, Rachel's an upcoming guest looking at how managers can communicate change. One of the things she talks about in her book is when we talk about change, we instantly jump to the big stuff, that merger, that restructure. In UK local government, we've got the local government reorganisation, so LGR, for UK listeners. But she has this lovely table in her book where she talks about, she's categorised all the different types of change. So yes, you have the big stuff, but you might have a team member who suddenly leaves. You might have a team member who dies unexpectedly, and that's a form of change. You might have a review that's taken place and a report that comes through where you've got to make a tweak to a system or a policy. So there's that. And it's something I've been exploring with some groups of managers that I've been working with recently. I'm just really interested in your thoughts on that. What are you talking about when you talk about change?
Firstly, I need to read the book because I love that idea that actually change is everywhere. And it's not some corporate initiative every time. It can be stuff that just, like they say in the Sunscreen song, like blindsides you on some random Tuesday. That's it, isn't it? Sometimes like your world can change overnight. Look at the pandemic. We went home one day from work, the next day we came in and the world was upside down and we were all working in a really different way. So I think it's really important that we, particularly managers, develop our own comfort in uncertainty and who we are as leaders in uncertainty, because we won't always be our best selves and we might not always do things in the way that we'd like to do them if we had lots of time to plan and think about it. So kind of thinking about who we are at our most under pressure selves as a leader. Who is that person? Get to know that person. How am I going to work alongside that person when I don't always choose to be that person, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Like get to know that shadow side.
Yeah. That's really interesting. That makes me think of a conversation with another guest, Leanne Davey, which is episode 4. We're talking about conflict in that episode, but she talks about treating conflict like doing your little and often like flossing, rather than it ending up being a root canal where you let it get so out of control. And I think it kind of echoes what you're saying, and it's kind of making me think that's what change is. Change can pop up in all sorts of ways. It isn't on top of the day job for people managers. It is the job. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And that's the other thing, when all this change is happening, the operational element doesn't disappear. What we're there to deliver isn't going to go away. This is on top of that. So that's the other thing that's really hard for managers, is they have to still deliver results at the same time when their team might not be at their operational best because their minds are full of all this worry or uncertainty.
Yeah. So on that note, obviously one of the most common issues that people like you and I are asked to help with is overcoming resistance to change. Now, I've changed my point of view of that over the years, and I'm just really interested in why you think people, first of all, do resist change. So you talked about yourself being one of those resistors at the start, or maybe disengaged rather than kind of resisting. But yeah, in your experience, Ann-Marie, what are the root causes of why people don't get on board with a change, whatever that change might be?
I think a lot of it is linked to people feeling that they're going to lose something, and we don't pay enough attention to that. We deal with what's on the surface or what we're noticing, the behaviour rather than the emotion. And if I think back to when I went through it myself, when I was part of a unitary local government reorganisation, and I remember we were at a leaders forum. So it's everybody that kind of managed and were leading people in the organisation. So there was lots of people in this room. And a colleague of mine had just been given a secondment to head up some of was essentially the communications work. And I was stood next to her, and a colleague of hers came over to her, looked at her badge because she had a different job title on this badge. And he said, "Oh, well done, you." And it was really patronizing and really uncomfortable. And it definitely wasn't, or I don't think was coming from a good place. It felt like it was a kind of like, get you, who are you? And at the time I remember thinking, I think that guy's a bit of an idiot. And it wasn't, a nice exchange. But it's only kind of years later, when I work in this stuff all the time now, that I realise what was playing out there, that she'd gained something that he was losing. She'd gained influence. She'd gained exposure to a senior team that were being recruited into the organisation. She was really at the top table and very humbly kind of working in that space. Like, it was right that she was in that role, but also what he felt was probably right for him too, that he felt like he was losing. He might have spent 20 years building his own influence in that organisation, and all of a sudden there was a new top team that doesn't know him. And so there's a room full of people like that don't know where they're going to go, what their job's going to look like. And it's not just about job security. It's about all the stuff that you work hard for, that, the influencing, the identity and reputation that can suddenly be at risk overnight. And that probably is more distracting than, will I have a job in 2 years? Because do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I could not nod my head more if I tried. I'm like a nodding dog here. I think that's really important. And I think that example is really powerful that you gave. I can imagine him, he's embarrassed. His pride's been dented. We all carry the array of human emotions, the good, the bad and the ugly. And it doesn't make us bad people. That embarrassment can come out as that snarky comment. That dent to our pride can mean that, right, I'm not going to get involved anymore, because it's a self-protective thing. And I think that's really important that you've raised that. Now, I know sometimes I find that stuff difficult to deal with, and I'm trained in this stuff. So imagine I'm a people manager. I've got all these different humans that I'm taking through some kind of change, and all these complex emotions are coming up to play. What are some of the practical things that you suggest to managers, or you help them with, so they can navigate that stuff?
I think one of the things that we probably don't think about enough is to talk about the stuff that's not changing. I think we focus so much on the stuff that's changing, but actually it's really helpful to help people kind of just park some stuff that we don't need to worry about right now. So I think that's a really practical thing that we take for granted and could do better. I also think that we talk about change as this big mountain, and actually everything we've done over the last few years will have got us to a place we're at right now. And so I don't think any change can feel completely brand new to a team. And so one of the things that I would advise is to think about showing that we're already on this journey, and we're not starting from scratch. This isn't brand new to us. It might feel slightly different, but look at all the stuff that we've got going on right now. I think that really helps. And I also think it's really important that managers create a space, they kind of almost put that facilitator hat on. So rather than being I have to be that protective parent, and I have to have all the answers, and I have to be really strong, actually there's something about just creating a space for people to make sense of it. And that's okay.
Lovely. And asking more questions. That's been coming up in a lot of the podcast guest interviews. Is the number one thing for people managers is just get better at asking more questions. You don't have to have all the answers, but ask more questions and listen to understand. And that's really coming through in what you're saying as well. You've given a couple of examples already. Have you got a recent kind of example of a team or an organisation who's successfully navigated the ups and downs of change, and kind of what was it the manager did that helped that?
As we know, we both love managing transitions. We really love Willie Bridges' work on that stuff, and we always nerd out about it. So I think one of the most powerful examples I've come across is where managers have really taken responsibility to hold that space around endings and not to fear it. So I've seen mergers where they've had goodbye parties for their organisations. And that's been really quite powerful, because it's not a case of, oh, this is going to be really awkward and isn't going to make people feel worse that we are moving out of this organisation. No, it's saying that we know this is really important to you and you care about this, and let's celebrate what a beautiful thing that we've created. And that doesn't just stop because our employer name changes. We're still here. We've got lots that we can bring with us. So I think that energy from managers, and it's not disingenuous. It's not about trying to sell change or being overly enthusiastic, but it is about recognizing we've got something great here and that can continue.
Yeah. And just the pace of life in general now means it's right next thing. And just having that stop, and even if it's just a brief pause to kind of end and acknowledge what's been, or if some people are going, or the team has closed down and will no longer exist in its current shape or form, that's really important. There's a reason why pretty much every culture has some kind of ceremony when somebody dies, for example, or when a child is born. So there's that marking of the ending, and it's giving a space for people, either marking an ending or marking a beginning. And that's a really important signifier, and it's no different in organisational life. And that's really what I'm hearing you say. And if I think about some of the organisations I've worked with over the years, there's those who do that really well. Because I think when we don't do that, and when people leave in the dark of the night, never to be spoken of again, that just fuels cynicism and distrust. It's like, what's going on here? So so the marking of the end and the marking of the new beginning, whatever that might be, is really important, rather than just like, right, next, let's flip it on its head. This can be like therapy for you, Ann-Marie. So thinking back across your career, what are the kind of the most common mistakes that you have seen people managers make when it comes to leading change? How can they avoid them?
I think it starts before change. And I think it's something that we probably don't ever want to admit to, but it's how we role model, how we respond to change. I remember working with a coaching client that I'd worked with for quite a few years, and she was right in the middle of a restructure, and she was kind of in that consultation period where everybody's quite raw and can't see the new beginning, can only feel the frustration around the ending and why and stuff. And we're thinking it through, and she was feeling like it was getting quite personal with her team, and their behaviour was quite difficult towards her. And so we kind of ventured into a bit of a conversation about what their experience of change has been outside of this as a team, and what her experience had been. And I know, working with her, that she was quite a maverick, and she was really respected. She was highly creative, really, really respected in the organisation. And so they'd had to implement a new system a few years ago. She didn't agree with how some of it was happening, and she'd got quite a lot of respect from her peers and from people across the organisation when she challenged some of the decision. And as a result of that, things had changed. And so in one sense, you've got somebody that is prepared to speak truth to power and tell people when things aren't right. But with her team, she was very open and honest about how she was feeling about things, questioning the competence of senior leaders and stuff like that. And that kind of tells her team that it's okay to do that when you're going through it too. So I do think there is something about, we're never going to be perfect. We shouldn't aim to be perfect. We're human, and that is a wonderful thing. But we also need to recognise that we carry a bit of a rucksack of things that have been and gone, and people will have seen how we've responded to change. And so I think that is something, if we can role model how to respond to change in a way that you would want your team to treat you, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's a powerful example, because there's things that you should share with your team and things it's probably better that you keep to yourself, but you still need an outlet. And so the thing that I really take from that story, and kind of what I'm keen for listeners to pick up on, is think really carefully about the space that you go to have your own outlet.
Yeah.
Of a place where you can offload the stress and the pressure of what you're feeling in relation to the change that you and your team are undergoing. So kind of bitching about the senior leadership team is probably not the best thing to do it with your team, but look, you're human. So maybe do that with a peer who's the same level of you and you can go for a coffee. So there's something about just being a bit more thoughtful about where you have that outlet and what you do and don't say to your team. I think that's such a powerful example. It makes me think of Professor Richard Boyatzis. He published a book last year called The Science of Change. It's quite a dense book, I'll be honest, but there's some real nuggets in it. And one of the things he talks about is leaders are the biggest social contagion in an organisation. So what you do more than what you say signals what is and isn't acceptable. And so that really comes through in your example. So you've worked across different sectors and industries, and you know how I feel about this. They're kind of the private sector good, public sector bad, particularly in the UK. I'm conscious there are listeners from other countries. And I'd be really interested if that rhetoric is in other countries. But in the UK, we have a very much a private sector brilliant, public sector terrible, which isn't always what I find. I'm just really curious when it comes to change and leading and managing change. Is there a difference between sectors?
I don't think there is. I think we talk about it differently and the nature of change might be different. You know, public sector in particular are used to change being driven by having kind of politically led change and budget cuts and I don't think there is a difference. I think possibly in the private sector, you might get a bit more of there's a shinier thing at the end of change, which could be linked to a company doing better in the world. And I think public sector, we don't always get that shiny thing. It can be quite draining when it's so linked to salami slicing and making cuts. And actually, in lots of places, and I've worked alongside the public sector, what you set out to do and what you actually achieve financially aren't always lining up. So there's a lot of pain for a financial output that might not get where you want to with it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because if I think about some of my private sector clients, they're in the same boat now because of what's happening in the wider world, the impact of conflict in other countries and then the knock-on effect on the economy. And I think everyone's having to downsize and cut their cloth accordingly, or at least they feel they have to. So I think I'm seeing the difference lessen, actually. And so with that in mind, we are in the age of digital disruption now on top of everything else. And so it feels like everything's moving even faster. Change is expected to be implemented even faster, whatever that change is. What advice would you give to any managers listening to this to help them try and stay ahead of the curve?
I was reading a really nice article in the Harvard Business Review this month, and it was talking about the fact that we need to stop focusing on generating enthusiasm for change and more around getting comfortable with uncertainty and developing the skills and mindset associated with that. And so I think that's something that managers and teams could be working on all the time. And it's not just about change, like this big thing. So thinking about how you can create space for people to practice with uncertainty, you know, maybe instigating a project that has an element of risk associated with it or doesn't have a clear outcome, and supporting your team to test and iterate and learn from something that's a bit safer than a big piece of change. I think that's a really healthy thing to do as a team. I also think there's something around, back to what we said earlier, like getting to know who you are when you're under pressure. I think that gets you ahead of the curve because that person will show up at some point. And I always remember I did a 360 feedback when I was employed, and somebody had said, you're like a whirlwind. Like you're either full of energy, and when you go quiet, I worry. And I just thought, like, if I'm having a quiet day, I'm having a quiet day. But I kind of forget that you have a massive responsibility in the signals that you send. So, you know, someone coming in to work and being a bit quiet could be because they didn't sleep very much last night because their kid was keeping them awake, or they had terrible traffic and could get a parking space. But in times of uncertainty, you build a picture of they know something's going on, or they know my job's about to be cut. Or so I think that's the other thing, is thinking about how much you're on show, which is why I will talk about it as a cabin, but like you need that cabin, you need that space where it's a trusted peer or someone else that you can check in and have a bit of an outlet, because that's, your team can never be that place. Really.
No, it's not appropriate. It's really interesting what you're saying, because you've used the word uncertainty a few times. It makes me think of the new podcast, or it's not new anymore, but from Brené Brown and Adam Grant, The Curiosity Shop. And there was a brilliant episode, I'll put it in the show notes, where they talk about uncertainty and what happens for us. And Brené, they come at it from two different perspectives, as you'd expect, because they're different people. But Brené talks about uncertainty theory, but she lays on top Hofstede's cultural continuum. So for listeners, there's a guy called Hofstede. He analysed lots of different cultures around the world, because different cultures behave and respond differently to different things. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to read more. But long story short, Brené says, in times of volatility, so economic strife, increased conflict, our need for certainty doesn't just increase. We want that certainty faster. I think that then translates into organisations. We are people of the world. We're watching the news. We're feeling all the things. Our utility bills are going up, and then we go into work and another announcement's made, or there's something that's happened in the team. My need to have a bit of stability, and so I'm going to put pressure on you, people manager, for that. And then Adam, as an organisational psychologist, was saying, even if the message is unpalatable, we would rather hear it and get that certainty than not. I'm just really interested in your thoughts on that, around our need for certainty increases as the world becomes more volatile, and actually we would rather hear the damn thing than not.
Completely. I often talk about like the trust triangle from Frances Frey, and she talks about like, for people to trust you, they need to see the real you. They need, this is a test of the model now, they need to see the real you. They need to see that you've got empathy, but they also need to see rigor in your logic. And I think that's the thing that I talk about with coaching clients time and time again, is actually people probably, they may not agree with the decision you're making, but if they can understand why you've had to make that decision, and even better, if they can discount, like they can understand what you've discounted, or like the process that you've got to make that decision, even if it's a really unpopular one, they will ultimately, I think, respect you because you've explained how you've got there. And I think what we do is we kind of skip that sometimes, and we share the decision, hold our nerve, and kind of wait for the backlash. And actually, there's a way, there's an alternative way that I think we could be better at that whole rigor in our logic and explaining how we got to where we've got to.
And doing it a lot faster. If I think of the number of times, both when I worked inside organisations in corporate roles and subsequently now I'm outside, the number of well-meaning leadership teams who hold off important announcements because it's the Christmas holidays coming up, or it's the summer holidays. I remember having a conversation with the leadership team. They didn't want to announce major cuts because they didn't want people to have awful Christmas holidays. But my challenge back to them was, people could end up spending money they are not going to have if they lose their jobs. And that's not because they're bad people. They just hadn't thought about that. So it makes me think of the Rumsfeld matrix, you know, the known knowns, the unknown knowns, you know, what do we know but understand or not understand? And so that's why it's important that managers and leaders are having conversations with the right people who will challenge them, like you and I do, just in case they miss stuff. And so that particular leadership team ended up making the announcement before Christmas so that people can make an informed choice and make sure their families are looked after.
Yeah, because ultimately we're dealing with adults. Like, I think we kind of lose sight of that sometimes. Yes. It's like we get into that really protective parent mode and we're like, oh, we can't do that right now. We need to hold back. But actually, we're adults at work. Let's deal with this in a way that's in respect of that.
Yes, yes. Now, I know you love a tool, a framework, a concept, because you're always, I mean, your LinkedIn and Instagram feeds are just, and your newsletter just full to the brim of helpful stuff because you like to help people. What are your favourite kind of tools or frameworks that have helped you lead and manage change really well? Now, you've already mentioned bridges, managing transitions, but are there any others?
I think really, I'm not locked into bridges, but I just think when it comes to change, it's a really simple way to make it feel a bit less confusing and really logical. And I think as well, like the books really, you could read that in a couple of hours. You can flick through it, but it's something I often send out to coaching clients and say, just give it a read. So I do think any change model or tool needs to be something that's really practical and something that explains what's going on behind the scenes, you know, and I really struggle with change really, you know, because this is the whole point. It's about transition. And so I really struggle when we just focus on the change and we just focus on we need to project manage this thing and get to the end. And actually there's a whole personal journey that's very individual that sits underneath that stuff. And I think the more we stay curious and observant of that and the stuff that sits underneath, the more we will respond in a way that's genuinely going to support people through something big.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, I really like the distinction between change and transition. So, for example, and William Bridges talks about this in his book, Managing Transitions, that change could be something like day one of moving into a new office building. So that's the change. The transition is I might not psychologically be on board with that. I might set my desk up the way it was set up in the old building, even though I'm not meant to have my own desk. I might still be doing the things that I used to do in the old building because I've not psychologically transitioned to the new way. So I really like that distinction you've set out around there's change, but then there's that kind of psychological piece underneath. And for people managers, it's really important you understand that. I mean, you talked about that right at the start. So quick fire question round, Ann-Marie. So you've had the questions in advance. I like to do a quick fire round with every guest. And so for you, we're looking at change. So if you could improve one thing about how organisations develop managers when it comes to change, what would it be?
I think it's that uncertainty thing, practicing, playing with uncertainty, having the skills to work with something that isn't neat and tidy and has a known outcome. I think get really creative with that and get some kind of experimental stuff going would be amazing.
Lovely. What is a myth about change or managing change that frustrates you?
It's much the same as in my culture work. I really do believe that you can't project manage this stuff. And so, yes, you need governance and yes, you need structure around it, but you also need space for stuff to emerge and to learn from it. And I think we are sometimes a bit too focused on wonderful Gantt charts telling us we're going to get there, when actually over there's chaos because of something we've done and we need to respond to that. I think, yeah.
Because that person was accidentally excluded.
Yeah.
Or the message didn't go out on time.
Yeah.
And what is one management behaviour or skill that you think is absolutely fundamental to managing change well?
The ability to cope with uncertainty yourself, which is not easy, but it's all the things we've talked about today. Find that cabin, find that safe space, get to know who you are, that dark side of you when you're under pressure. Like that's the stuff that's going to hold you and your team together when you're going through a difficult time, when you're able to manage yourself well.
Lovely. And listeners will know by now, because we like to give you a lot of good stuff, but sometimes it can be a lot to kind of get through. We want to leave you with just one thing. So Ann-Marie, if there was just one thing you would advise a manager to do after this episode, it is
to stop trying to make change disappear, because it's not going to disappear. We need to accept it and feel more comfortable with it.
Yeah. So it's just the norm.
Just the norm.
Just the norm. Lovely stuff. Thank you so much
for
giving me your precious time. I know how sought after you are, how much you've got on your plate. So really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. And I just know listeners will take away loads from our conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Hayley.
So there you have it. Episode 6. With the wonderful Ann-Marie Barlow. And I'm incredibly grateful to Ann-Marie because she was really battling a terrible cold. I'm just really grateful for her continuing to do the podcast episode. And even with a cold, she still had so much good stuff to share. The 3 things that jump out for me are the importance of managers like you role modelling how to navigate the ups and downs of change. We can't ask our team members to respond in certain ways if we're not responding in that way and kind of showing them the way either. I loved the bit of our conversation about uncertainty, and I've really been digging into uncertainty management theory. I spoke at a leadership conference recently about this and the role of communication in helping us navigate uncertainty. And I'm sure this is something that my next guest and I will discuss about communicating during change. And then the final thing, the third thing that I'm left with is the importance of understanding each of the people that you manage. We are all human with the variety and sometimes messiness of feelings and emotions. And it's important we understand that. We don't just look at kind of what we're seeing in the moment. We look behind that. What's feeding that reaction? And I think that's where we can make a difference as managers, where you can make a difference as a manager. And the question that Ann-Marie posed to you and all the other managers listening to this episode is, who are you during change? And get to know that person, warts and all. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Now, you've heard the one thing I suggested you do, but maybe there's something else you're inspired to do on the back of today's episode. So here's my question. If there was just one thing you'll do following this episode, what is it? Note it down, or even better, tell someone. Now, I love it when you comment and tell me the things you've been inspired to try after an episode, or even when you send me through a problem you want help with. So please email me at halopsychpod@gmail.com, and the email is in the show notes. Did you enjoy this episode? Then please show your love by leaving a review and giving it a rating. It really helps other people to find my podcast. Thank you once again, and in the meantime, go and manage with confidence.